Hey guys, Mr. Flanagan here, checking in with you about fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is the federal government's attempt to fight either inflation or recession, or in some cases, a depression, which is known as a severe recession. Now, fiscal policy is undertaken by the president and Congress or the federal government. It could be mentioned either way. So the tools of fiscal policy are a change in government spending or a change in taxes to, again, either solve inflation or recession. So if you're ever asked what are the tools of fiscal policy, it is only government spending and then a change in taxes, again, by the government, not interest rates, not anything else that we'll get to later. So fiscal policy deals with two components of GDP. The first one being G, because government spending, pretty straightforward. If the government changes spending, that influences GDP. And a change in taxes, which actually directly influences the C component of GDP, because taxes sort of get filtered through the consumers. If the government raises taxes, then consumers take home less money on their paycheck, meaning they have less money to spend, and their consumption will decrease. Same on the flip side, if the government decreases taxes, you take home more money on your paycheck, which means you will eventually go out and spend more money, which increases the C component of GDP. So here's kind of a flow chart to help us organize. I'm going to start over on this side with solving a recession using fiscal policy. So a recession is essentially a slowed down economy. We want to speed it back up. During a recession, we have lower real GDP than we should be at. We are below our full employment. And if we are below full employment, our GDP is lower. That means we also have high unemployment, because if we are not producing things, our GDP is low. That means we need to fire workers because we don't need them to be producing products because production is decreasing. So if we are at a recession, the government wants to use expansionary fiscal policy. They want to expand or grow the economy, not to shrink it, because if you shrink it, you make the recession worse, possibly even into a depression. So again, our two tools of fiscal policy are taxes and spending. So if the government wants to expand the economy, grow GDP, what they're going to do is first, they could decrease taxes. If the government decreases taxes, people will have more money. Hopefully they will go out and spend more money. Now, this part here, right here references government spending. So the government could also choose, in an attempt to expand our economy during a recession, to increase its own government spending. Now, that could be paying for new programs, public monuments, infrastructure like roads and bridges, whatever it might be. They can say, we're going to spend this many millions or billions of dollars, which will help put people back to work, give the people more money, which then also multiplies out into the economy. So during a recession, we are below our full employment. And so we're going to switch to a graph that shows us the effects of expansionary fiscal policy. So here we started at a depression. We were really, really low. Our GDP was far below our maximum possible output. And we can see that right here, starting in the horizontal range. And because the government chose to either decrease taxes or increase spending, or both, since we were in a depression, the C and G, or C or G components of GDP increase. So GDP is increasing, which means aggregate demand shifts to the right. So shifting to the right could bring us all the way back to long-run equilibrium, where all three curves are intersecting, which again, even though there is inflation, prices go up, we are back at our full employment output. Our GDP increased, which means unemployment decreased. So our economy is in our ideal situation now as a result of this expansionary fiscal policy and these two tools. So again, if we are in a recession, we want to expand by either decreasing taxes or increasing government spending, which leads to an aggregate demand increase, which will increase price level inflation. But we also have an increase in real GDP or production, which leads to a decrease in unemployment, because if we are producing more things, we need to hire more workers to do that production. Now, on the flip side, we are going to look at inflation. Inflation is essentially an overheated economy that we need to slow down. We are attempting to produce too much, which is leading to higher prices and not actually leading to any increase in production or GDP. So if we are overheating, the government would want to contract the economy, to shrink it. And there's two ways they can do that. Again, we want to shrink the economy or contract it, to use a more appropriate term. So if they want to shrink the economy, there's two ways that they could act, two tools. First of all, the government could increase taxes, because if the government increases taxes, again, that takes money out of the consumer's pockets, which means they will consume less, which will decrease GDP and shift AD to the left. Government could also decrease its own spending, decrease spending on military, welfare programs, anything that they could possibly choose that works with the budget. By decreasing spending, there's less money out there for consumers, there's fewer jobs being created, which will contract the economy back down to our long-run equilibrium point. So let's take a look at that on our graph as well. So we started out here, we were sped up. We are at an unsustainable spot where we are temporarily able to produce beyond our maximum. But in the long run, it is actually impossible, because it's just going to lead to inflation, too many workers kind of bumbling around, and output is not actually increasing. So if we started here, the federal government says, well, we need to contract or shrink back to long-run equilibrium. So two choices: if they decrease taxes, or excuse me, not decrease, if they increase taxes or decrease government spending, that would shift AD to the left, which would bring us right back here to our long-run equilibrium, which is where we want to be. We'll be producing at our maximum possible output. Prices will go back down to equilibrium. And yes, even though people will lose their job, the problem here was that we had too many people working, which was leading to higher prices and no actual change in production in the long run. So again, this is a helpful sort of graphic organizer for you to take a look at in terms of fiscal policy. And that's really it. Just fiscal policy is the government changing its either taxes or its own spending behavior to solve an economic problem. And the key thing to remember here is that fiscal policy affects the AD curve, because again, it is the G component, government spending, or the C component through the government changing taxes, both of which are shifters of aggregate demand, not SORAS or LRAS. So as always, if you have questions, shoot me an email, send me a message, or come and see me at any of the times I'm available, and we can talk. Have a good one.